Hello there, my name is Ethan, and today we're going to be talking about the Sit-In movement and how it took a stand to desegregate lunch counters with a determination and peaceful protest. Before that, we have to go back 57 years, way back to February 1st, 1960. This was a time where it was hard to be an African American. They were racist, and most things were segregated, especially in the South. It just wasn't fair. Our story begins in Greensboro, North Carolina, at the North Carolina Agricultural and Technical College, and four friends, Ezell Blair Jr., Franklin McLean, Joseph McNeil, and David Richmond, later known as the Greensboro Four. They wanted change, no more segregation. They knew it wasn't fair, so they decided to do something about it. The four of them, inspired by Martin Luther King Jr., decided to come up with a peaceful protest. A peaceful protest is designed to prove a point without anyone getting hurt. They wanted to get rid of segregated lunch counters, so they went down to a store called Woolworth's. This was a store, but it also had a lunch counter. Just like most stores from the South, it was segregated. There was a white counter and there was a black counter, but the black counter didn't have any seats. They went over to the store section and bought some toothpaste and some school supplies, just to see if the clerks would sell them the merchandise. They bought the merchandise without a problem. This was expected. But now it was time for the real test. They went over to the white counter and took their seats, and they ordered some coffee. But this time, they were refused service.
But why can't we order a coffee here?
You have to go over to the black counter.
Why can't we sit at this counter? Shouldn't we all have equal rights?
I just can't. This is what life was like for African Americans back in 1960. Stores had the right to refuse service to blacks, and there was nothing that they could do about it. But that didn't stop them from wanting change. Instead of getting up and going over to the black counter, they decided to stay until they got served. And they did just that. They stayed at Woolworth's until it closed for the night. And they packed up their stuff and left to go back to their dorms. But the next day, Woolworth's was in for a surprise. When the Greensboro Four came back, they brought 50 more students with them. They sat down at the white counter, studying or reading the Bible, waiting to be served. But it was not easy being a protester in this movement. Soon, whites started to get upset by the protesters sitting at their counters. They began trying to annoy or aggravate them, trying to get the protesters to fight back. The protesters, however, would stay completely calm. Soon, the whites got more and more aggravated. They started using physical violence against the protesters. The protesters would not fight back, however. There were workshops for the protesters to help teach them how to stay calm and control their temper. When the protesters got beaten up, they would curl up into a ball and take the beating. Soon the police got involved. When one of the beatings occurred, the cops would show up. But instead of arresting the person beating the protester, they would arrest the protester instead. The thing that annoyed the whites the most was when one protester got arrested. Before the whites could sit down at the counter, there was already a whole nother group of protesters sitting at the counter. Stores were losing money, and a lot of it. So much that some of them were forced to close down. The whites were continuing to get mad. In some cases, acid was thrown at the protesters' faces. At one sit-in alone, over 45 protesters were arrested, including 3 of the Greensboro Four. But soon, the protesters were spreading over to other colleges and to other states in the South. By the end of the year, over 70,000 black students had joined the movement, and they were fighting peacefully for equality. The protest was going on in over 65 cities in 12 states. Soon, stores and lunch counters were forced to give in due to losing too much money. This was the moment that they were all dreaming of, equality at lunch counters. In an interview with the Greensboro Four, they said that they have been planning this event for their whole lives. The movement did not just change the way lunch counters were. There were sit-ins on buses, pools, and many other public areas. Not to mention, the sit-in movement started an organization called the SNCC, or the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. The sit-in movement changed so many lives. For once, there was some equality for blacks. They had to use hard work and determination for what they wanted, but in the end, it was all worth it. Thank you for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one.